by Dan Beaver. Hey, Dan, how the heck are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am terrific. Charlie and I have gone old school. We've argued more in this show than we have, I think, in the last 3 years. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been kind of fun.
It sounds great, but I don't think I'll add to the argument too much. I don't think I've got anything controversial to say.
Oh, just leave it up to us. We'll find something. We got you on a little bit of an extended segment here tonight because we wanted to have a chance to talk to you. A lot of times we get cut short, and there's so much to talk about with the fantasy racing, but we want to talk for a few minutes at least about what happened at Bristol, what happened this week with Kurt Busch signing with Stuart Haas Racing and with Kyle Larson shortly to be announced joining Ganassi Racing. So kind of give us your thoughts on those things. There was a lot happening this week in NASCAR kind of off the track.
Yeah, I keep finding myself, I wake up every morning and just see what news is going to pop up. I fully expected to see Nigel Mansell and coming out of retirement and getting into a car. It's been that bizarre.
If you could put him on that Stuart Haas Racing team, and he wouldn't stir it up any more than the 4 that are already on there, I don't think. Nigel was a strong personality, but there's 4 real strong personalities on that team in 2013-14.
You'd have to open up the window size a little bit if you get him out of retirement.
Probably, yeah. There's a lot of testosterone in that organization now, and I think it's going to. I think they'll feed off each other, and I think they'll all become even more aggressive than they have been on the track, which could be bad news for the competitors. Could eventually be bad news for them if they can't keep their emotions in check. Harvick, I think, is often a very emotional driver. We know Kurt Busch is. Tony Stewart actually is kind of the least emotional of those 3. So it's going to be fun to watch. And I think I don't know that we know what the impact is going to be yet. I think the easy answer is you've got 3 extremely aggressive drivers. They're going to make their way to the front, but they're going to make some enemies getting to the front. They're going to cause some crashes getting to the front. And Busch is already crash prone, and that could end up being a recipe for disaster.
Hey, Dan, Dan, I wanted to ask you if you've heard anything as far as a possible crew chief for Kurt Busch.
No. I haven't seen anything I haven't seen anything, period, and certainly not anything that I think is credible.
Because that could be an interesting scenario as to who is going to fill that role for him. We know that Rodney Childers is going to come over and be Harvick's. So, again, I think when you throw in those you talk about strong personalities, you throw in the strong personalities of the crew chiefs that are along with Zipadelli, it could be a real big dynamic as far as all those guys together. It would be a hell of a Christmas party.
And really, I mean, Danica doesn't have the ability to win that those guys do, obviously, at least at this point in her career. But she's not a shrinking violet when it comes to confrontation. And I think that she could be another kind of a ignition point for problems with that team. It's going to be really interesting to watch, I think. Steve and I talked about, here was one of the Fast Lap questions, Dan. I don't know if you were listening or not. Steve's question was, what 4-car Chevy team do you think is going to win more races next year, Hendrick Motorsports or Stuart Haas Racing? What do you think?
I think you got to go with Hendrick Motorsports. The chemistry is there. They've got proven drivers. As long as you got Jimmy Johnson on the lineup, he's the one that's capable of winning the most races, and he's going to lead the Hendrick Motorsports contingent. Tony Stewart's a great driver, and he's won this year, but we haven't seen nearly that same level of expertise, skill that we've seen from Jimmy Johnson. Then you go on down the line. Casey Kane, I think, is probably more capable of winning than Kevin Harvick. Dale Earnhardt is probably about the same as Kurt Busch, although Kurt Busch probably will win and Earnhardt probably won't. And Gordon is certainly more capable of winning than Danica Patrick. So I think as you match them up and go down the line, I think Motorsports keeps them out each time. But on tracks like on tracks where driving it in deep helps you, Stewart Haas, I think, is going to have a bit of an edge.
Yeah, I agree with you. Almost man for man and woman in that scenario.
Driver for driver.
Here's my question: which Chevy team will win more races next year in 2014, RCR or Stewart Haas Racing? Because RCR has been the number two, in my mind, the number two Chevy team for as long as I can remember. I don't think they are anymore.
There, I think he gives a nod to Stewart Haas. Harvick's coming over. He's got experience. He's younger than Jeff Burton earlier, he certainly, I think, has more potential there. Dillon is probably won't win next year. Menard might, but it's going to be one of those weird scenarios where it's either fuel mileage or two-tire stop at the end of the race, something like that. So Stewart Haas, I think, will be the stronger team overall than Richard Childress.
Okay, well, we probably should get to this fantasy stuff at some point here tonight.
I would think so.
Yeah, so we're going to Atlanta Motor Speedway, one of my favorite racetracks.
New tire combination.
Fast track, new tires. We only go there once anymore, so it's kind of the mystery track now. Are they testing there today? No, they're testing somewhere.
They have done testing there. No, they're testing at Richmond today, and they're testing someplace else, I forget, but not at Atlanta today.
Okay, by the way, we are talking to Dan Beaver, who's fantasy racing expert at yahoosports.com and NASCAR.com. You can follow Dan on Twitter if you're not already following it, at Fantasy Race, the best fantasy racing expert on the internet. So, Dan, going to Atlanta, what are you looking at? What's important, and what do your teams look like?
Well, I think this is not a week to gamble. You've only got 2 more weeks before the chase, and the drivers that have been gambling, that may have been gambling, are probably going to get out of that mode pretty quick. Victories are great, but you can't afford to have something happen like has happened to Johnson in the last 2 weeks, or you risk losing all of your momentum. So I think you, from a fantasy standpoint, you kind of adopt that same mentality, and you play it safe. In Group A, that means Matt Kenseth and Jimmy Johnson are the safe options. Kenseth, with his multiple wins on the cookie-cutter tracks, the similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks this year, certainly recommends himself. Last week's victory at Bristol didn't hurt anything. Doesn't help, but didn't hurt anything. And I think Jimmy Johnson goes back to basics, and he's probably your second selection at Atlanta. Last year he had a bad race here, but he can't afford to do that again. He risks losing whatever momentum he had. It'd be much better to give up the 10 bonus points than it would be to crash again. And you go back a little bit further, and Johnson has a third-place finish in 2010, second-place finish in 2011, so he obviously knows how to get around this track. He swept Victory Lane in 2007, had another victory back in 2004. So this is his kind of track. And he's not the king of the cookie-cutter track anymore, but he's still definitely one of the people that you got to pay homage to.
Hey, Dan, I don't know if it makes a whole lot of difference seeing as Vickers is now in that 55 car, but he has lost the crew chief that was there for that car with Mark Martin for most of the year. Rodney Childers has left. Does that change any thought you might have as how Vickers is going to get placed in any of this stuff going forward?
Probably a little bit, but I've been a little cautious about Vickers anyway. He's done really well, but in the limited opportunities that he's had, but we haven't seen him in that weekly grind yet. And when we did, in the number 11 car while Denny Hamlin was hurt, he wasn't producing. He had a couple of accidents that didn't help. But I don't know that he's going to be that same stellar performer week in and week out as he was when he was doing this part-time. So you got to look at how he's performed on given track types and treat him like a full-time driver. You can't treat him like a part-timer anymore, that he's coming in full of confidence, full of vigor. You gotta put him back into that grist mill and see what happens. cookie cutter tracks are everybody runs well there at certain times, and only one driver has a streak of top tens this year, swept to the top 10, and that's not Vickers. He had the 8th place finish at Texas. He finished 31st at Kansas, and again at Kentucky. And again, not all that was his fault. There was some hardship in there. So that 8th place finish might be more important than the 231st, but it puts him kind of far down the list where Group B is concerned. And I think you got a couple of other options that are probably above him.
So who do you like in C at Atlanta?
I like Martin Truex Jr. Actually to win this week.
Ooh.
He had Truex had a 2nd place finish at Texas. He had a 4th place finish at Kansas in a car that was certainly capable of winning, and he's the only driver who has swept the top 10 this year. And last year he swept the top 15 in all but one race, and that was the 17th. So he's great on these similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks, and I think he's got to anchor your roster. He also needs to overcome last week's bad race.
Yeah, he also needs to win. He also needs to win a race to get into the chase, probably.
Yeah, but there are a lot of guys in that same. You're going to see those guys gamble a lot.
Yep.
You're going to see the Jeff Gordons, the Brad Keselowskis, Truexes, and even Logano can't. The guys that are just above the 10th place mark right now can't afford to give up anything, and if they've got a shot at stretching the fuel mileage or 2 tires at the end, they're going to have to take it.
Well, even
so that could make them a little risky.
Even Dale Jr. I mean, he's up in I think maybe 7th or something like that. But if he would have a disastrous finish in this race, he could be looking, he could be on the outside looking in with no win.
And he hasn't done very well on the cookie cutter tracks this year.
Right.
He's the only driver that swept the top 10 last year in the races that he started. But other than a 7th place finish in Vegas, he hasn't cracked the top 10 since. Got a little bit closer with a 12th at Kentucky, but this has not been his track type in 2013. So he's got to be a little nervous.
I would think so. Well, we've got about a minute and a half to go, Dan. Let's wind up the Yahoo thing, and then we'll all throw in our. You'll throw in your intelligent pick, and we'll throw our wild ass guesses in, and
we'll go from there.
We'll go from there. We'll go to next week.
Well, I think Kurt Busch is probably the second pick. Either Kurt or Kyle Busch is the second pick in Group B, depending on how many allocations you have remaining for those 2 drivers. This team is used to dealing with losing people, so I don't think we've got to worry about the lame duck status for Kurt.
Okay.
Kyle Busch, he's hit or miss. He's either all or nothing on the cookie cutter tracks. So you got to put him on your roster and hope that this is the time he's all and not nothing. And those, I think, the Truex and the 2 Busch brothers are your top picks in B, with Edwards coming in a close 4th. Been great at Atlanta. He's great on unrestricted intermediate speedways, especially the 2 mile and the really fast 1.5 miles. So Edwards can't be overlooked either. I think you're going to pick your 4 from those drivers. Down in Group C, you've got Allmendinger in the 47 and Dillon in the 33. Then Stenhouse in the 17, and that's your pool to pick from down in Group C. I probably would go with Allmendinger, then go with it in pretty much the order I just listed: Allmendinger, Dillon, then Stenhouse. And I'd say Stenhouse just because there can be more opportunities to start him a little bit later. And we really don't know what's going to happen with Allmendinger or with Dillon. But they all had fairly strong runs in their last cookie cutter outings. And in Group C, you got to go with horsepower and just kind of the total package. Not a good week to roll the dice on dark horses. Although, got to give a shout out to Reagan, Kloppel, and one of the drivers, was it Gilliland? No, who finished in the top 20 last week at Bristol. It was a great week for Group C drivers. So. Strimmy, and with all the trouble that he had, Strimmy pulling out a 17th place finish, that team showed a lot of heart, and I think you're going to look at them next week when we go to Richmond.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's good to see those teams have a good week. Steve and I are big fans of a lot of those guys because they're the ones that will actually talk to us on radio. But we do like them, and they work really hard for what they get. So that's good stuff. Okay, so we'll put you on the spot. Who are you going to pick to win? Excuse me, Atlanta. Easy for me to say.
I think Truex is the surprise winner. I think he pulls it out. He's my pick.
Martin Truex Jr. Okay, that'd be a pretty popular win, I think. All right, Dan. He is Dan Beaver. You can follow him, of course, at Fantasy Race on Twitter. Read all of his fantasy advice and tips at NASCAR.com on YahooSports.com, and listen to him here on Pit Row every Tuesday and on the replays on Ustream. Dan, thanks a lot for your time again, and good luck with your picks this week in Atlanta. We'll talk to you next week when we go to Richmond for the last race before the chase.
And I'll settle for none of my picks getting hurt this week.
All right.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Okay. Steve-O, who's your pick?
Thanks,
See you,
Dan.
Dan.